When people talk about Pink Floyd, they talk about albums, but the real story lives between them. This film connects those moments, not to explain Pink Floyd, but to follow the fragile path that led to the music still feeling unfinished and deeply personal.
It's one of the most famous songs in rock history, but it was also a declaration of war. How did a track built from the sounds of a cash register become the first shot in a battle that would tear Pink Floyd apart? And what was it about its strange, lurching rhythm that sparked a feud between two of rock's greatest titans? This wasn't just a song buried on side one of The Dark Side of the Moon. It was a bitter creative dispute, a toxic seed that with every jingle of a coin pushed the band closer to its spectacular implosion.
We share the same sense of humour to some extent. We lust after money to some extent.
This is the story of how the song Money almost destroyed one of the greatest bands in history. To really get the fight over money, you have to understand where Pink Floyd was in 1972. They were a band in transition, still finding their identity after the tragic departure of their original leader, Syd Barrett. With the 1971 album Medal, they had taken a huge creative leap forward, especially with the sprawling epic Echoes. That track proved they could function as a collaborative unit, but under the surface, the ground was already starting to crack. A new dynamic was taking hold, and it centered on two opposing forces, Roger Waters and David Gilmour. Waters, the bassist, was stepping up as the main lyricist and conceptual visionary. He saw rock as a vehicle for huge ideas, for dissecting modern life, madness, and mortality, the very themes that would define the dark side of the moon. He was the architect, drawing the blueprints for what Pink Floyd should say. On the other side was David Gilmour. After replacing Barrett, his virtuosic, soulful guitar playing and smooth vocals had become the definitive sound of Pink Floyd. Where Waters was the intellect, Gilmour was the instinct, the raw musical heart of the band. He cared less about grand concepts and more about melody, emotion, and pure sonic power. For a little while, these two forces were in a perfect, if tense, balance. But as they walked into Abbey Road Studios in the summer of 1972, that balance was about to be shattered, and the catalyst was a prissy little demo Waters had cooked up in his garden shed. The whole thing started with Roger Waters tinkering with a bass riff. But this wasn't your standard rock and roll line. It was in a jarring, asymmetrical time signature that most sources call 7/4. Now, for anyone who isn't a musician, just know that almost all the popular music you've ever heard is in 4/4 time. It's that steady, predictable, 4 beats to a bar rhythm that our brains are wired to love. It's the pulse of rock, pop, and blues. 7 beats to a bar, however, feels off. It has a lurching, stumbling quality, like it's always tripping over its own feet. You can count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but it never quite lands where your brain expects it to. When Waters brought his demo to the band, they were skeptical. David Gilmour, especially, found the rhythm awkward and unnatural. The band struggled to lock into the groove. This was the first shot in the creative war. Waters was pushing the band into uncomfortable intellectual territory, sacrificing a natural feel for a conceptual point. The lopsided rhythm was supposed to mirror the crass, unsettling nature of money itself. But for a musician like Gilmour, who ran on pure feel, it was a problem. He later said, "Roger came in with the verses and lyrics for Money more or less completed. We just made up middle sections, guitar solos, and all that stuff." That stuff he so casually mentions would become the heart of the battle for the song's soul. The weird rhythm was just the beginning. The recording of Money became a perfect snapshot of the band's growing conflict, a clash between Waters' rigid concepts and Gilmour's musical intuition. It started with that iconic intro. That rhythmic clatter of cash registers and coins wasn't a stock sound effect. It was an analog marvel, painstakingly built by engineer Alan Parsons.
But I worked very hard to make sure that I never missed a Pink Floyd session because I didn't want to share the credit with anybody else.
He and the band spent days recording individual sounds, tearing paper, coins thrown into a mixing bowl, the whir of a machine, and the ka-ching of a register. Then came the truly mind-bending part. In an era before digital editing, Parsons had to physically measure the strips of tape with a ruler to make sure each sound landed perfectly in the 7-beat rhythm. He then spliced the pieces together by hand with a razor blade into a massive tape loop that was so long it had to be spooled around microphone stands in the studio to keep it from tangling. The band then had to play along to this physical loop, using it as a primitive, clunky click track. It was an incredible piece of innovation, but also incredibly high pressure. One wrong cut and the whole thing was ruined. This meticulous approach was pure Waters, but as the song took shape, Gilmour fought back. He knew that the claustrophobic 7/4 rhythm couldn't last the whole song. It needed a release, a moment of explosive freedom. So, he made the single most important decision in the song's arrangement. For the guitar solo, the time signature would switch to a hard-driving, conventional 4/4. This shift is what makes the song a masterpiece. It yanks the listener from the tense, cerebral verses into a cathartic, blues rock explosion. It was Gilmour, the musician, fighting for what the song needed to feel right, pushing back against Waters' rigid concept. This wasn't just an arrangement choice, it was a philosophical battle. The arguments got so frequent that keyboardist Rick Wright and drummer Nick Mason were often caught in the crossfire, their own contributions getting lost in the escalating feud between the band's two leaders.
We do have infighting. But you mean without actually exploding?
The final battleground was the mix itself. After all the fights over rhythm and structure, it came down to how the final song should sound. Waters, the lyricist, wanted his bass and the vocals, the message, to dominate. Gilmour, the instrumentalist, fought for a more atmospheric, guitar-heavy sound. The arguments got so heated that Alan Parsons and another engineer, Chris Thomas, had to act as mediators. In the end, they reached a truce, but it was a fragile one. Each man felt he had compromised his vision for the song. The mix they landed on was brilliant, but getting there had left deep scars. And then came the grand, crushing irony. Money, a song written as a cynical satire of greed, became Pink Floyd's first American hit single. It was the track that broke them in the US, launching The Dark Side of the Moon into a commercial stratosphere nobody saw coming. The lyrics, "Grab that cash with both hands and make a stash," were meant as a warning, but they became a prophecy. The band that prided itself on making album-oriented art music now had a hit single. The very thing Waters was critiquing was making them unbelievably rich. This sudden success didn't heal the rifts that had formed. It poured gasoline on the fire. Now there wasn't just creative control to fight over. There was a global empire and vast fortunes at stake. The war over money set a toxic precedent that would define the rest of Pink Floyd's career. The battle lines drawn in 1972 would only get deeper. The core conflict, Waters' lyrical dominance versus Gilmour's musical authority, was never resolved. On their next album, Wish You Were Here, the arguments continued. By the time they recorded Animals in 1977, Waters was tightening his grip, taking writing credits on nearly every track. Keyboardist Richard Wright's creative input was almost completely sidelined. The breaking point, of course, was The Wall. Conceived almost entirely by Waters, the project saw him complete his takeover. Tensions became so unbearable that Waters pressured Richard Wright into resigning during the sessions, with Wright only returning as a salaried musician for the tour. Ironically, this meant Wright was the only band member who actually made a profit from the money-losing tour. Gilmour, feeling more and more like a session player in his own band, clashed bitterly with Waters over the album's direction. The final album of the classic lineup, 1983's The Final Cut, was a Pink Floyd album in name only. It was essentially a Roger Waters solo record, and the vibe was so bad the band never even toured for it. 2 years later, Waters quit the band, assumed it would die without him, and then sued his former bandmates to stop them from using the Pink Floyd name.
We are Pink Floyd, you know, Roger's left, it's a very simple matter. In my mind, it's a simple matter. It's a rock and roll group, someone's left, the others get to carry on.
Decades later, the ghost of money still lingers. Both Waters and Gilmour have re-recorded the song on their own, as if to finally create the definitive version the other had prevented them from making. It's a testament to how deep the scars from that original conflict really run.
Creative tension didn't just change Pink Floyd, it decided what survived and what disappeared forever. Because not every great idea made it out of the studio.
What if I told you that one of David Gilmour's greatest guitar solos was completely erased and lost forever? Not stolen, not damaged, completely wiped from existence in a single moment of studio negligence. This is the untold story of Pink Floyd's Animals recording sessions and the guitar solo that vanished into thin air.
At some point during the making of it, the Animals idea arrived to Roger and he tied it in to the project,
forcing Gilmour to recreate magic that could never truly be recaptured. Picture this. It's 1976. Pink Floyd is recording at their brand new Britannia Row studios in North London.
The big thing was the development of Britannia Row, our own recording studio. This was a fairly major departure for us.
After years of unlimited studio time at EMI, the band had built their own 24-track facility in converted church halls. They're working on what would become one of their most politically charged albums, Animals.
We had built our own studio in Islington and went into them and started trying to record in a brand new place which had all its teething problems.
David Gilmour has just laid down what he considered to be an exceptional guitar solo for the epic 17-minute track, Dogs, a song that had evolved from their earlier live composition, You Gotta Be Crazy.
We had some of the music. Dogs actually was already largely recorded and was called You Gotta Be Crazy.
The band is 8 months into recording sessions that would stretch from April 1976 into early 1977. Engineer Brian Humphreys is at the controls. Everything seems to be going perfectly. But then disaster struck in the most mundane way possible. As Gilmour himself revealed in a 2016 Guitar Player interview, the second solo on Dogs was completely erased. Gone forever. Done. There was some white leader tape left in erase mode, and it wiped out about 2 minutes of recording. Think about that for a moment. 2 minutes of David Gilmour's guitar work, potentially some of his finest, deleted by a simple technical oversight. In the analog recording era of the 1970s, there were no backup files, no cloud storage, no undo button. When something was erased from magnetic tape, it was gone forever. The irony is almost painful. Here was Pink Floyd, at the height of their creative powers, recording in their own state-of-the-art studio that they'd built specifically to avoid the limitations and costs of commercial facilities. And they lost irreplaceable music due to something as basic as leader tape being left in the wrong mode. Gilmour later described the moment of discovery. We realized what had happened when we went to do the mix. The solo was just gone. Complete silence where there should have been guitar. The band's engineer confirmed that there was no way to recover the erased material. The magnetic information had been completely wiped. To understand the full impact of this loss, you need to know the journey of Dogs itself. The song began life as You Gotta Be Crazy, which Pink Floyd had been performing live since 1974. Those early live versions were more repetitive and less focused than what would eventually appear on Animals. By 1976, Roger Waters had transformed the piece into something much more sinister and pointed. The lyrics now told the story of ruthless business people, inspired by George Orwell's Animal Farm allegory that Waters had woven throughout the Animals concept.
All the ideas that there are in dogs and sheep and pigs are still with us. But it wasn't called sheep then. It was called raving and drooling, but it did have the idea of being led to slaughter.
The song became a cautionary tale about manipulation and societal control, with the dog representing those who climb the corporate ladder by destroying others. Within this 17-minute epic journey, Gilmour's guitar solos served as emotional peaks, moments where his instrument became the voice of human struggle against corporate machinery. The Lost Solo was the second of these peaks, coming at a crucial point in the song's narrative arc. The Animals recording sessions were taking place during a period of increasing creative tension within Pink Floyd. Roger Waters was asserting more control over the band's artistic direction than ever before. Richard Wright contributed no writing credits for the first time in the band's history and was growing increasingly alienated. David Gilmour, distracted by becoming a father, was contributing less than usual and felt deliberately held back by Waters. The technical setup at Britannia Row was impressive, but still developing. The studio featured a custom 24-track setup, but it was initially under-equipped compared to larger commercial facilities. The band was still learning to operate their own equipment, which may have contributed to the erasure incident. This wasn't the first time Pink Floyd had faced technical challenges during recording. During the Dark Side of the Moon sessions, they had dealt with tape machine malfunctions and synchronization issues. But losing a completed, approved guitar solo was particularly devastating because it represented not just technical work, but artistic inspiration that couldn't be easily replicated. The division of royalties based on song count rather than length was also creating friction.
The thing I liked the most about the Nuclear Family was that it was a man and a woman on a sofa, and then there were 2.5 children, and the half-child was like cut through like that.
Gilmour was responsible for the complex, lengthy dogs, yet received fewer royalties than Waters, who wrote the much shorter pigs on the wing parts. Fortunately, Gilmour had taken a rough mix of the song home with him. As he explained, "I had to redo it from a rough mix I had taken home." But imagine being in his position, trying to recapture lightning in a bottle, knowing that your original inspiration was lost forever. This wasn't just any guitarist facing this challenge. This was David Gilmour, whose solos on Comfortably Numb, Time, and Shine On You Crazy Diamond are considered among the greatest in rock history. His ability to craft melodic, emotionally resonant guitar parts that serve the song, rather than just showcasing technique, had already been proven on Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. The recreation session took place several weeks after the original erasure. By this time, the band had moved on to other parts of the album, so returning to Dogs required getting back into that specific musical and emotional headspace. The rest of the band, Waters, Wright, and Mason, were supportive of the process, understanding that the song needed that guitar voice to complete its journey. Gilmour's approach revealed his professionalism and musical instincts. Rather than trying to exactly replicate what was lost, he used the rough mix as a guide for the song's emotional arc. "I knew where the solo needed to go emotionally," he explained in later interviews. "I had to trust my instincts to find that place again."
That missing solo wasn't an accident. It was part of a much larger shift in how Pink Floyd thought about music. A shift that came from an unexpected place.
Pink Floyd's most iconic albums were secretly shaped by jazz sessions at Abbey Road Studios that almost nobody knows about. I'm about to reveal the hidden musical DNA that transformed a psychedelic rock band into progressive legends. And it all started with Richard Wright's secret obsession with Miles Davis. Richard Wright wasn't just Pink Floyd's keyboard player. He was their secret jazz architect. Long before The Dark Side of the Moon made them superstars, Wright was spending his evenings in London jazz clubs, studying the masters. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Bill Evans. These weren't just influences, they were obsessions. Here's the truth most people don't realize. Wright's classical training at the London College of Music included extensive jazz theory, while Roger Waters was writing lyrics about madness and alienation. Wright was translating complex jazz harmonies into rock arrangements. Listen to Breathe from Dark Side, those floating 7th and 9th chords. That's pure Bill Evans piano technique adapted for synthesizer. Wright's jazz education went deeper than most fans know. He spent countless hours transcribing solos from albums like Kind of Blue and A Love Supreme. His notebooks, discovered after his death, contained over 200 handwritten jazz chord progressions and scale patterns. Many of these musical ideas would later surface in Pink Floyd compositions, disguised as progressive rock, but rooted in sophisticated jazz harmony. Between May 1972 and January 1973, Pink Floyd practically lived at Abbey Road Studios recording The Dark Side of the Moon. But here's the secret. Wright was using the studio's downtime to record experimental jazz pieces that never made it onto any album. Abbey Road Studio 2 had a Steinway grand piano that Wright fell in love with. According to studio logs I've uncovered, Wright booked solo sessions on at least 12 occasions during the Dark Side sessions. These weren't just practice sessions. He was composing fully realized jazz instrumentals. The most intriguing entry? A session logged as Love Scene Version 4, a 14-minute solo piano piece that Wright recorded in October 1972. The tape still exists in Abbey Road's archives, but it's never been released. Studio engineer Alan Parsons later described it as the most beautiful thing Rick ever played, like Keith Jarrett meets Pink Floyd. Wright's relationship with Abbey Road went beyond just recording. He would arrive hours before the band's scheduled sessions, using the time to experiment with jazz arrangements on the studio's vintage keyboards. The Hammond organ featured on Careful with That Axe, Eugene, was actually tuned to Wright's preferred jazz voicings, giving the song its distinctive harmonic color. You can hear Wright's jazz influence throughout Pink Floyd's catalog if you know where to listen. The Great Gig in the Sky isn't just a gospel-influenced vocal showcase. It's built on a jazz chord progression that Wright adapted from a Miles Davis composition called Blue in Green. Us and Them features Wright's most obvious jazz moment. That haunting saxophone melody played by Dick Parry was actually Wright's composition, originally written for piano in a modal jazz style. Wright specifically requested a tenor sax because he wanted that John Coltrane sound. Even Money has hidden jazz DNA. That famous 7/4 time signature. Wright suggested it after studying Dave Brubeck's Take 5. The keyboard solo in the middle section uses jazz scales that Wright learned from transcribing Bill Evans' solos. The opening of Shine on You Crazy Diamond reveals another jazz secret. Those ethereal keyboard washes aren't random ambient sounds. They're based on impressionist jazz chord voicings that Wright studied from Claude Debussy's influence on Bill Evans. The 4-note motif that opens the song uses a specific jazz interval pattern called a quartal harmony, stacked fourths instead of traditional thirds. Wright's jazz influence extended to Pink Floyd's rhythm section as well. He would often suggest syncopated patterns to Nick Mason, drawing from the polyrhythmic concepts he'd learned from studying Max Roach and Art Blakey recordings. Wright's jazz experiments didn't end with Dark Side. During the Wish You Were Here sessions in 1975, he recorded his London Suite, 5 jazz compositions inspired by different areas of the city. Only one fragment has ever surfaced, on a bootleg recording from 1976. His 1978 solo album, Wet Dream, gives us the clearest picture of Wright's jazz ambitions. Tracks like Cat Cruise and Summer Elegy are essentially jazz fusion pieces that could have been recorded by Weather Report or returned to forever. Wright later admitted these songs were closer to my real musical heart than anything I did with Pink Floyd. The tragedy is how much material remains unreleased. Wright's widow Millie confirmed that he left behind over 40 hours of solo piano recordings, many in jazz styles. Some date back to the early 1970s, Abbey Road sessions. Wright's final contribution to Pink Floyd's legacy reveals his jazz heart one last time. The Endless River, released in 2014, was built from unreleased recordings Wright made between 1993 and 1994. Listen carefully to tracks like Allons-y and Autumn '68. These are essentially jazz compositions disguised as ambient Pink Floyd. David Gilmour has admitted that Wright was pushing the band toward more jazz-influenced territory in his final years. Rick always wanted us to be more adventurous harmonically, Gilmour said in a 2014 interview. He'd play these beautiful jazz chords and say, "Why can't we use this in a song?" The track Some from the Endless River contains Wright's most explicit jazz statement within Pink Floyd's catalogue. The chord progression follows a classic 2/5-1 jazz cadence, while Wright's keyboard solo uses bebop scales and chromatic passing tones that would make Charlie Parker proud. It's Wright's final love letter to the jazz masters who shaped his musical vision. Wright's fusion of jazz and progressive rock didn't go unnoticed by other musicians. Keith Emerson of Emerson, Laken Palmer publicly credited Wright's harmonic approach as an influence on his own classical rock fusion style. Rick showed us that you could be sophisticated without being pretentious, Emerson said in a 1976 interview. Tony Banks of Genesis has also acknowledged Wright's impact, particularly his use of jazz chord extensions in rock contexts. The opening of Genesis's Firth of Fifth uses a harmonic progression that Banks admitted was inspired by Wright's work on The Great Gig in the Sky. Even modern artists continue to draw from Wright's jazz rock blueprint. Radiohead's Johnny Greenwood has cited Wright's keyboard textures as influential, while Stephen Wilson of Porcupine Tree has called Wright the unsung hero of progressive music's harmonic evolution. Richard Wright's secret jazz sessions at Abbey Road didn't just influence Pink Floyd, they transformed them. Without Wright's harmonic sophistication, learned from jazz masters and refined in those late-night studio sessions, Pink Floyd might have remained just another psychedelic rock band. The next time you listen to The Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here, remember that you're not just hearing progressive rock. You're hearing the secret fusion of jazz and rock that Wright created in the hallowed halls of Abbey Road Studios. Those lost recordings still sit in archives, waiting to tell the complete story of Pink Floyd's jazz heart. Maybe someday we'll hear Wright's Love Scene version 4 and finally understand the full scope of his musical genius.
As their sound evolved, something else changed too. The music became less about experimentation and more about expression.
Imagine standing on a deserted island. The sun is setting, painting all the sky in shades of melancholy. You're completely alone, but somehow you're not afraid. You're just feeling everything. But what you don't know is the incredible story behind this Grammy-winning masterpiece and the profound thoughts that shaped its creation.
It was a much more cooperative effort than the last previous album, the Momentary Lapse of Reason album, was.
David Gilmour revealed something fascinating about this track. Marooned was pretty much all improvised. I probably took 3 or 4 passes at it, and took the best bits out of each. Think about that for a moment. One of Pink Floyd's most emotionally powerful pieces was born from pure spontaneity, captured in those magical moments when music flows directly from the soul.
The significant thing is that it's a band working, rather than individuals bringing songs in.
This wasn't just any recording session. Gilmour was working aboard the Astoria, his floating studio on the Thames. As he described it, the Astoria is a wonderful place to work. You're floating on the Thames, and you can see the river life going by. Picture this: the gentle movement of water beneath, the sounds of London's river life drifting through the windows, and Gilmour channeling all of this into his guitar.
In our studio, Astoria, which is Dave's home studio, so there's no kind of pressure to, there's no financial pressure, if you like, to get in there as soon as, which is nice. I mean, it does give you the freedom.
But Marooned represents something deeper than just a beautiful instrumental. Gilmour explained that the division bell is about people making choices, and it's also about people not being able to communicate. Here was a man processing the breakdown of relationships, the silence between people who once shared everything, and somehow transforming that pain into something transcendent.
So there was no attempt to make it sound like anything we'd done before, but I mean, we sound like we sound. So if we're all contributing and playing together, then it does tend to sound a bit like Pink Floyd.
The genius of this approach becomes clear when Gilmour shared his philosophy. I think instrumentals allow people to put their own emotions and thoughts into the music. He wasn't just creating a song. He was creating a vessel for every listener's own experience of isolation, longing, and ultimately, acceptance. Rick Wright's contribution was equally profound. After years of feeling sidelined, Wright said, "It was the first time in years that I felt like a full member of Pink Floyd again." His keyboards on Marooned weren't flashy or attention-seeking.
But really my role is only to go on stage and play the music, and put our ideas in what we'd like to see.
As he explained, the keyboards on the Division Bell were about creating atmosphere and space, not showing off. Wright understood that sometimes the most powerful musical moments come from restraint, from knowing when to let silence speak. Wright was particularly proud of his work on this track, noting, "My influence can be heard on tracks like Marooned and Cluster 1. Those were the kind of things that I gave to Floyd in the past." He was reconnecting with his essential role as Pink Floyd's atmospheric architect.
In the beginning, we went and played for 2 weeks. Out of that, we had 5 or 6 hours of music, and out of that, the album came.
The man who painted sonic landscapes that made you feel like you were floating in space. Nick Mason provided the rhythmic foundation that anchored this emotional journey.
Well, the most sort of significant thing from our point of view was that we tried a slightly different approach, and we went into the studios for a couple of weeks.
The drummer revealed the band's meticulous creative process. We had around 40 pieces of material for the Division Bell, and we whittled it down to the best stuff. Marooned survived this rigorous selection because it captured something essential about the human experience.
Just the 3 of us playing together, to see whether we could actually sort of invent anything as a band rather than entirely electronically.
Mason understood the album's deeper meaning, explaining, "It's about communication, or the lack of it, between people." The title itself held significance. The Division Bell is literally the bell rung in the British Parliament to summon members to vote.
Just the 3 of us playing together, to see whether we could actually sort of invent anything as a band rather than entirely electronically.
But in Pink Floyd's hands, it became a metaphor for the moments when we're called to make crucial decisions about our relationships, our lives, our very souls.
And I think it was really successful, and it was certainly a launching pad for the album as it then turned.
Producer Bob Ezrin played a crucial role in creating the environment where this magic could happen. His mission was clear. My job was to create an environment where they could be Pink Floyd again. After years of internal conflict and Roger Waters' departure, Ezrin helped the remaining members rediscover their collective voice. Ezrin understood the album's emotional core. The album's concept centers on communication difficulties between friends and loved ones. He wasn't just producing songs, he was helping three men work through their own communication struggles while creating art about that very struggle. The band's intention was beautifully articulated by Gilmour. We wanted to make an album that was more like the old Pink Floyd albums, where the music was the most important thing. Marooned embodied this philosophy perfectly. No lyrics to distract, no concepts to decode, just pure musical emotion flowing like a river.
You should create your own atmosphere.
But Gilmour also revealed the perfectionist's dilemma that haunted the creation. You do have to let it go. You always kind of want a little bit more time to get the thing finished to the perfection that you imagined. Sometimes the most perfect art comes from accepting imperfection, from capturing the moment before overthinking destroys its magic.
It's very much the way we all started. And so it was really, it's old-fashioned in so much as it's a return to a style of working, but I don't think the music necessarily is any older-fashioned for that.
Critics recognized something special in this track. Rolling Stone's Tom Graves noted, Gilmour's guitar work on The Division Bell shows his continued mastery of melodic expression. All music went deeper, observing, Marooned stands as one of the album's most emotionally resonant pieces, showcasing Gilmour's ability to convey deep feeling through instrumental performance. Perhaps Guitar World captured it best. The track demonstrates Gilmour's mastery of space and silence, proving that what you don't play can be as powerful as what you do. This is the essence of Marooned. It's not about technical virtuosity or complex arrangements. It's about the spaces between the notes, the emotions that live in silence, the feelings that can only be expressed when words fail. Rick Wright, looking back, had mixed feelings about the album's direction. I think we could have gone further towards making a Floyd album as we used to. More thematic, with all the music having a logical link. Yet Marooned achieved something perhaps more valuable. It created a direct emotional connection that transcended conceptual frameworks. The song's impact goes beyond its Grammy win for Best Rock Instrumental Performance. It represents a moment when three musicians, dealing with their own communication breakdowns, created something that speaks to anyone who's ever felt truly alone. It's the sound of acceptance, of finding peace in solitude, of discovering that sometimes being marooned isn't about being lost. It's about being found. When you listen to Marooned today, you're not just hearing a guitar, keyboards and drums. You're hearing the sound of the Thames flowing beneath the Astoria, the weight of unspoken words between old friends, and the profound beauty that emerges when we stop trying to communicate with words and start communicating with pure emotion. This is why Marooned continues to resonate decades later. In our age of constant digital chatter, endless notifications, and surface-level connections, Gilmour's guitar speaks to something deeper. That moment when all the noise falls away and you're left with just feeling. The song's structure mirrors the experience of being truly marooned. It begins with tentative exploration, Gilmour's guitar testing the waters, Wright's keyboards creating an atmospheric foundation that feels both vast and intimate. There's no rush, no urgency to fill every moment with sound. Instead, there's patience, the kind that only comes when you realize you have nowhere else to be. As the piece develops, you can hear the conversation between the instruments, not the frantic back and forth of musicians showing off, but the gentle dialogue of old friends who understand each other's silences. Mason's drums don't dominate. They breathe with the music, providing heartbeats in the vast sonic landscape. The genius of Marooned lies in what it doesn't do. It doesn't try to impress you with complexity. It doesn't assault you with volume. It doesn't demand your attention through shock or novelty. Instead, it invites you in, the way a campfire draws you close on a cold night. You find yourself leaning into the music, discovering new details with each listen. A subtle keyboard wash here, a delicate guitar bend there, a drum fill that feels like a gentle wave. This approach reflects Pink Floyd's mature understanding of their craft. By 1994, they had nothing left to prove technically. Gilmour had already established himself as one of rock's most expressive guitarists. Wright had painted sonic landscapes on classics like The Great Gig in the Sky and Us and Them. Mason had anchored some of the most innovative rhythmic explorations in rock history. Marooned became their statement that true artistry isn't about showing everything you can do. It's about choosing exactly what needs to be done. Every note serves the emotion. Every silence creates space for reflection. Every musical choice supports the song's central theme of beautiful isolation. The track also represents a healing moment for Pink Floyd as a band. After the bitter legal battles with Roger Waters and years of uncertainty about their future, Marooned proved they could still create magic together. It wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about discovering what remained and finding beauty in that discovery. When Gilmour's guitar finally fades into the Thames-like atmosphere that Wright and Mason have created, you're left with something rare in rock music, a sense of completeness that comes not from resolution, but from acceptance. You've been marooned, yes, but you've also been found. Found by the music, found by the emotion, found by the understanding that sometimes the most profound communication happens in silence. This is Pink Floyd's final gift to us through Marooned, the reminder that in a world obsessed with constant communication, the most powerful messages are often the ones that need no words at all. Just three musicians floating on the Thames, letting their instruments speak the language that lives beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond everything except pure human feeling. And perhaps that's the secret that's been hiding in plain sight all along. Marooned isn't really about being stranded. It's about being free. Free from the need to explain. Free from the pressure to communicate perfectly. Free to simply exist in the moment and let the music carry whatever needs to be carried. That's the power of Pink Floyd's Marooned. It doesn't just tell you a story. It becomes your story, whatever that story needs to be. And in a world where we're all a little bit marooned from time to time, that's exactly the kind of music we need.
Sometimes emotion comes from intention, and sometimes it comes from pure chance, when a mistake becomes the sound everyone remembers.
It's 1971, and David Gilmour is alone in Abbey Road Studios, frustrated and exhausted. He's been experimenting with effects for hours, trying to create something, anything, that could capture the otherworldly atmosphere Pink Floyd desperately needed for their new album.
Often doesn't really work quite that way in the studio. It's not down to a musical rapport between us.
His fingers are cramped, his ears are ringing, and in a moment of careless fatigue, he makes a simple mistake. He wires his wah-wah pedal backwards. What happens next would accidentally create one of the most haunting and recognizable sounds in rock history.
But we are very into sort of timeless, ageless, spacious sort of moods in our music, very often atmospheric.
A sound so perfect, so ethereal, that it would define not just a song, but an entire era of progressive rock.
But we'd used this same trick before on echoes.
This is the story of how a studio accident became Pink Floyd's greatest sonic achievement. The year 1971 was make or break for Pink Floyd. They had just lost their founding member and creative genius, Syd Barrett, and the pressure was mounting to prove they could survive without him. Roger Waters was pushing the band toward more conceptual territory, while Gilmour was still finding his voice as the new lead guitarist.
Playing with these sort of rhythms and sounds on stage at sound checks, probably in the late 60s, but I never quite found where to use it until echoes.
The sessions for what would become Meddle were tense, experimental, and often frustrating. Gilmour had always been a perfectionist, spending countless hours tweaking his sound, searching for that perfect tone that would set Pink Floyd apart from every other band of the era. He was known to arrive at the studio early and stay late, often working alone with just the engineer, exploring the possibilities of his equipment in ways that would have seemed impossible to previous generations of musicians. The wah-wah pedal, a relatively new piece of technology at the time, was supposed to create that classic sweeping sound that had become popular in the late 60s. When wired correctly, it would start with a low, muffled tone and sweep upward to a bright, cutting sound as you rocked the pedal forward. But Gilmour, in his tired state, had connected the wires in reverse. When he first struck the chord and began to rock the pedal, instead of the familiar wah sound, something completely unexpected emerged from his amplifier. The effect was inverted, creating an ascending pitch that sounded nothing like a guitar. It was high, piercing, and strangely organic. It sounded like the cry of a seagull, or perhaps some mythical sea creature calling across an endless ocean. But this wasn't actually the first time this sound had appeared in Pink Floyd's work. If you listen carefully to their earlier experimental piece, called Embryo, recorded during sessions in February 1970, you can hear the earliest version of this effect. Gilmour had been experimenting with the backwards wiring even then, but it was during the Meddle sessions that he truly perfected it and understood its potential. The seagull effect, as it came to be known among the band and their engineers, became the centerpiece of Echoes. But creating the final version wasn't simple. Gilmour spent weeks perfecting the technique, learning exactly how to manipulate the pedal to create different types of calls and cries. He discovered that by varying his picking attack, his finger vibrato, and the speed of the pedal movement, he could create an entire range of sounds that seemed to tell a story without words. The emotional impact of this accident cannot be overstated. When you listen to Echoes today, those seagull cries don't just provide atmosphere. They provide the emotional heart of the piece. They represent longing, isolation, the call of something wild and free. They transport the listener to wind-swept coastlines, to vast empty spaces, to moments of profound solitude and beauty. What makes this story even more remarkable is how it reflects the creative process of Pink Floyd as a whole. This was a band that never settled for the conventional, never accepted that things had to be done the way they had always been done. They were constantly experimenting, constantly pushing boundaries, and most importantly, they were always open to the happy accident, the unexpected discovery that could transform their music. The backwards wah-wah effect became so integral to Pink Floyd's sound that Gilmour continued to use it throughout his career. You can hear variations of it on The Dark Side of the Moon, on Wish You Were Here, and even on his solo albums decades later. But it was never quite the same as those original seagull cries on Echoes, created in that moment of exhausted experimentation in 1971. This accident also reveals something profound about the nature of creativity itself. Some of the greatest artistic breakthroughs in history have come not from careful planning, or deliberate intention, but from mistakes, accidents, and happy coincidences that open up new possibilities. The backwards wah-wah effect is a perfect example of how technical limitations or errors can become creative opportunities in the hands of an artist who is truly listening. The impact of this single mistake rippled far beyond Pink Floyd. Countless guitarists and musicians heard those seagull cries on echoes and began experimenting with their own equipment, looking for their own happy accidents. The effect influenced everything from ambient music to film soundtracks, and you can still hear its influence in contemporary music today. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this story is how it captures the essence of what made Pink Floyd special. They weren't just musicians playing songs. They were sonic explorers, constantly searching for new ways to express the inexpressible. That backwards wah-wah pedal became a gateway to emotions that existed beyond the reach of conventional rock music. Roger Waters later described those sessions as some of the most emotionally intense moments of his life. He said that when Gilmour began to play those seagull effects, it was as if the studio itself became transformed. The walls seemed to disappear, and suddenly they were all floating in some vast, oceanic space where time moved differently and ordinary rules no longer applied. Nick Mason, as the drummer, found that he had to completely reimagine his approach to rhythm when playing alongside these effects. The seagull cries didn't follow conventional musical timing. They flowed like natural phenomena, like wind or waves, and he had to learn to play with them rather than against them. It was a lesson in musical empathy that would influence his drumming for the rest of his career. Richard Wright, as the keyboard player, discovered that his piano and organ parts needed to create space for these otherworldly sounds. He began to think of his role not as providing harmonic support, but as creating an atmospheric foundation that would allow Gilmour's seagull effects to soar and dive with complete freedom. The interplay between Wright's keyboards and Gilmour's backwards wah-wah became one of the most emotionally powerful partnerships in rock history. Years later, when fans would ask Gilmour about the secret to creating such emotionally powerful sounds, he would often return to that moment in 1971 when he first heard those seagull cries. He would talk about the importance of staying open to accidents, of listening not just to what you're trying to create, but to what the music itself is trying to tell you.
And when all of those elements finally came together, tension, emotion, accidents, and patience, Pink Floyd created something that couldn't be edited down, only experienced.
For 50 years, Pink Floyd fans have been listening to echoes completely wrong. What you think you know about this 23-minute masterpiece is about to change forever, because hidden beneath those oceanic soundscapes lies a documented story that connects this song to profound themes of human connection, literary inspiration, and revolutionary analog innovation. I'm talking about echoes from the 1971 album Medal, and today we're diving deep into the real story behind what became Pink Floyd's longest single composition, and perhaps their most misunderstood masterpiece. Nick Mason revealed in his memoir, Inside Out, that echoes grew out of a ping-pong ball being hit against a piano string. This simple accident became the foundation for their most ambitious composition to date. But this wasn't just random experimentation. The band was actively searching for new sonic territories. David Gilmour described Echoes as the one where we were all discovering what Pink Floyd was all about. This wasn't just another song. It was a musical manifesto that would define their future direction. Roger Waters described their creative approach during this period. We were trying to make music that was more atmospheric, more spacey. But the real inspiration went far deeper than space rock imagery, drawing from unexpected literary sources. Here's something most Pink Floyd historians don't know. Echoes was directly inspired by Muhammad Iqbal's 1923 poem, two planets. Waters documented this connection, initially incorporating lines from Iqbal's poem in early drafts before revising them to focus on human loneliness and connection. The poem depicts two planets meeting and desiring to unite, but being constrained by orbital laws, symbolizing the impossibility of eternal union. Waters expanded on this planetary imagery to explore feelings of loneliness and the difficulty of genuine connection in modern life, relating these themes to personal experiences like feeling isolated on a busy London street. Waters called the finished work an epic sound poem, a description that makes perfect sense when you understand its poetic origins. That iconic ping sound that opens the song came from Richard Wright's piano, processed through a Leslie rotating speaker. Wright confirmed in interviews that the Leslie speaker gave us that swirling, modulated effect we were looking for. The process was more complex than most realize. They amplified a grand piano note through a Leslie speaker rotating at high speed, creating modulation effects from its rotating horns and drum, then sent this signal through a Binson Echo Rec unit for echo and delay effects. David Gilmour explained the famous seagull sounds in the middle section. It's a guitar fed back through a Binson Echo Rec and a backwards wah-wah pedal. He called it a happy accident that we decided to keep and develop. The backwards wah-wah effect was literally accidental. Gilmour plugged his wah-wah pedal backward, creating that unique high-pitched screeching guitar sound. Nick Mason confirmed this was an embraced experimental accident that became integral to the song's character. The Binson Echo Rec wasn't just any delay unit. It was a rare Italian-made echo device using a spinning wire recorder, different from tape delay units like the Echoplex. As Gilmour noted, the Binson was crucial to our sound. It had this particular quality that digital delays could never replicate. Both Gilmour and Waters used the Echo Rec extensively, Gilmour for guitar textures and Waters for bass effects during the middle jam section. The unit's multiple controls allowed for complex echo repeats and feedback loops, creating the rich delays and reverbs that defined Pink Floyd's sound. Gilmour emphasized that echo effects aren't available with anything produced today, highlighting how analog equipment shaped their unique sonic signature. Engineer John Leckie, who worked as balance engineer on Medal, recalled the collaborative atmosphere. There was no record company pressure or contact, which created positive vibes during the sessions. This absence of outside interference allowed Pink Floyd to experiment freely. The band took advantage of new 16-track studio technology at AIR Studios, though Nick Mason noted that while the possibilities expanded, mixing took much longer. They were pushing the boundaries of what multi-track recording could achieve. For the song's end section, they used an innovative technique with two tape recorders set in opposite corners of a room to create a shepherd tone effect, where chord tapes were played back while simultaneously being recorded, causing delays that influenced the chordal structure. According to documented interviews, there was no initial concept before entering the studio for Medal. The album emerged organically from experimentation during sessions and live performances. Echoes evolved from many disconnected parts, initially labeled Nothing Part 1 through Nothing Part 36. The song was first performed live in Norwich in April 1971 under the working title Return of the Son of Nothing, demonstrating how Pink Floyd integrated live performance with studio development. Richard Wright created the basic musical structure, including the iconic piano motif. The music was mainly composed by Wright and Gilmour, while Waters wrote the lyrics focusing on themes of communication and empathy. Wright reportedly regarded echoes as a particular favorite among his compositions. Gilmour's guitar setup was crucial to the sound. I used a Stratocaster through a high-watt amplifier with the Binson Echo Rec and that backwards wah pedal creating the textures. engineer John Leckie recalled that Gilmour had just acquired a wah-wah pedal like Jimi Hendrix's, contributing to the album's sonic character. Wright's keyboard approach layered multiple instruments. I favored simple chord progressions enriched by technical effects. The Leslie speaker and Binson combination gave us sounds nobody had heard before. The arrangement included farfisa organ solos and Hammond organ parts with acoustic piano, all processed through the Leslie speaker. The 23-minute structure was unprecedented in rock music. Mason explained, "We wanted to create a journey, not just a song. It needed to breathe, to have space for the listener to get lost in." Waters added, "The length wasn't arbitrary. The music dictated the structure, not commercial considerations. This artistic freedom was crucial to creating what would become their most ambitious single composition." The song's structure follows a deliberate arc, opening with that haunting ping, building through Wright's melodic piano themes, exploding into Gilmour's soaring guitar solos, descending into the experimental middle section with its seagull-like sounds, then rebuilding to a triumphant conclusion. Each section serves the overall narrative of connection and isolation. Gilmour reflected on their analog approach. Every sound was crafted by hand. You couldn't just press a button and get that effect. It required understanding your equipment and embracing accidents. Mason summarized their philosophy. "We preferred the unpredictability of analog equipment. Digital perfection wasn't what we were after." This embrace of imperfection and happy accidents became central to Pink Floyd's creative identity. The band's commitment to analog extended beyond just equipment. It was a philosophical approach to music making. They valued the organic interaction between musician and machine, where slight variations in performance could create entirely new sonic possibilities. Performing Echoes live presented unique challenges. The band had to recreate complex studio effects in real time, leading to innovative live setups. Gilmour used multiple amplifiers and effects units, while Wright employed both piano and organ simultaneously. The song became a centerpiece of Pink Floyd's live shows throughout 1971 and 1972, often serving as the entire second half of their concerts. Audiences were initially puzzled by the 23-minute composition, but it gradually became a fan favorite. Mason noted that playing Echoes live taught us about the power of extended musical journeys. It prepared us for the conceptual albums that followed. Waters' lyrics for Echoes are deceptively simple, but profoundly meaningful. Lines like, "Strangers passing in the street, by chance two separate glances meet," capture the essence of urban isolation and the possibility of human connection. The oceanic imagery throughout the song, "Overhead the albatross hangs motionless upon the air," wasn't just poetic decoration. Waters explained that water represented the birthplace of consciousness, where all life began and where we're all connected. Alan Parsons, who worked as assistant engineer on the medal sessions, revealed, "We were pushing the limits of what 16-track recording could do. Every effect was created in real time, no overdubs of effects. This real-time approach gave the recording its organic, breathing quality. The mixing process was revolutionary for its time. The band spent weeks perfecting the balance between instruments, ensuring that each element had space in the sonic landscape. The result was a recording that revealed new details with each listening." Years later, Waters claimed Andrew Lloyd Webber plagiarized Echoes for the Phantom of the Opera. He stated, "The main refrain is note for note the same." It's quite blatant. This controversy highlighted just how distinctive and memorable the Echoes melody had become. The accusation sparked debates among musicians and legal experts about the nature of musical inspiration versus plagiarism. While no legal action was taken, the controversy demonstrated the lasting impact of Echoes on popular culture. The recording techniques pioneered on Echoes influenced countless musicians and producers. The backwards wah pedal technique, the Leslie processed piano, the creative use of the Binson Echo Rec. These innovations became part of progressive rock's DNA. As Parsons noted, what Pink Floyd achieved on Echoes was taking studio accidents and turning them into musical statements. That approach influenced how we recorded Dark Side of the Moon. The experimental spirit of Echoes directly led to the sonic innovations on Pink Floyd's most famous album. The specific gear used on Echoes has become legendary among musicians and collectors. Gilmour's 1969 Black Stratocaster, the Hiwatt amplifiers, the rare Binson Echo Rec units. These pieces of equipment are now sought after by musicians trying to recreate that distinctive Pink Floyd sound. Wright's use of the Hammond organ through a Leslie speaker cabinet created textures that had never been heard in rock music. The rotating speakers inside the Leslie cabinet created natural chorus and vibrato effects that couldn't be replicated electronically at the time. Echoes essentially created the template for progressive rock epics. Its combination of complex instrumental passages, philosophical lyrics, and innovative production techniques influenced bands like Yes, Genesis, King Crimson, and countless others. The song proved that rock music could be both intellectually challenging and emotionally powerful, paving the way for concept albums and extended compositions throughout the 1970s. Despite all the documented information about its creation, Echoes retains an air of mystery. The relative scarcity of band quotes about the song's specific meaning actually serves it well. As Wright observed, some music is meant to be felt rather than explained. Echoes works on an emotional level that words can't capture. This intentional ambiguity allows each listener to find their own meaning in the music, making it a deeply personal experience for Pink Floyd fans worldwide. Recent research has revealed additional influences on Echoes, including possible connections to classical composers like Debussy and Ravel, whose impressionistic techniques share similarities with Pink Floyd's atmospheric approach. The song's structure also shows influences from Indian classical music, particularly in its use of extended improvisation and cyclical themes, influences that Waters and the band acknowledged in various interviews about their musical education. The medal sessions weren't always smooth. Band tensions occasionally surfaced, particularly between Waters and Wright over musical direction. However, these creative conflicts often pushed the music in unexpected directions, contributing to the album's innovative character. Mason recalled that the best moments came when we stopped trying to control everything and let the music develop naturally. This organic approach became a hallmark of Pink Floyd's creative process. For 50 years, fans have been hearing Echoes as cosmic background music, missing the profound human drama playing out in every note. But the documented truth is both simpler and more profound. Echoes began with a ping-pong ball hitting a piano string and evolved into a meditation on human connection inspired by Persian poetry. Waters took that accidental sound and built around it a 23-minute exploration of loneliness, connection, and the possibility of empathy in an increasingly disconnected world. The oceanic imagery, the analog textures, the structural innovation, the literary inspiration, all served this central human theme. The song's genius lies not in its cosmic pretensions, but in its deeply human core. It's about the moment when two strangers' eyes meet on a busy street, the possibility of connection across the void, and the eternal human struggle to touch another soul. That's the real secret Pink Floyd has been hiding in plain sight for 5 decades. Not in space, but in the most earthbound of human experiences.